Hello and welcome back to the Roundup by News of the Week, the show where I, Jay Whitwell, summarise and explain the news, helping you to stay informed. Sorry for the lack of episode last week. I really got busy with uni work and things like that. So lucky for you, you get the news this week plus one or two stories from last week. Without further ado, then I'll get on to the news. Firstly, and we'll go back to last week to start with, The Independent noted Sir Keir Starmer announced he was abolishing NHS England to bring service back to the heart of government. Starmer has announced plans to bring the service back under the remit of the Department for Health and Social Care. This means that the NHS England will be abolished and disbanded after running the health service for just over a decade. Sir Keir Starmer pledged to go further and cut more bureaucracy in the state and to put money on the front line. He also said the tough decisions will keep coming. The move, though, is expected to save £500 million per year by stopping what the PM and Wes Streeting called the duplication of jobs. However, in doing this, half the people at NHS England could lose their jobs, which is around 7,650 people, and a further 3,300 people from the Department of Health and Education could also lose their jobs. Tory leader Kemi Badenoch seemingly backed the decision, and she said she believes the government should pursue any policy they deem necessary in order to deliver better public services. The former Health Minister James Bethell tweeted saying, "I wish we'd had the guts to do this," and other Conservative MPs also showed their support of the Labour measures to streamline the government, but they also cautioned that by doing this change and by bringing in this measure, the performance of the health service is directly Labour's responsibility. The Lib Dems welcomed the reform but said it was pointless unless there was social care reform undertaken alongside it. And while the CEO of NHS England also backed the moves, he said that the announcement was unsettling for the organisation's staff. Think tanks and other organisation leaders like those of the Health Foundation, the King's Fund, Royal College of and the Royal College of Nursing shared similar warnings about distractions to staff members and over the potential for mismanaged reorganisation. From that, we'll move on to news this week. So in policy changes this week, 4 News detailed the government has unveiled a crackdown on disability benefits. Liz Kendall, the Department for Work and Pensions Secretary, announced welfare reforms aiming to save the government £5 billion. And while you've probably heard that figure, you might not have heard what they're actually doing. So, firstly, they announced a permanent increase to universal credit. They will also scrap capability work assessments by 2028, and instead people will be assessed through their eligibility for PIPs, that is, personal independence payments. In line with those changes, eligibility for PIPs will be narrowed. The goal of the policy, aside from the £5 billion they're saving, is to get people to go to work and get people to go back into work. This is especially true for young people who they may disallow from being eligible altogether. To that end, Labour will spend £1 billion per year helping people back into work. This comes after a growing concern among the amount of people claiming welfare. The IFS called these health-related increases significant and noted that the increases were different in England and Wales than in most countries of a similar stature. In any case, the move has caused concern amongst think tanks, with the Resolution Foundation predicting cuts to be harsh and that will mean 1 million people are affected. It has also caused splits within Labour, with many calling the decision the wrong choice and saying there are more compassionate options. The Independent noted government has faced a defeat in the House of Lords over the ending of private school tax relief. The Lords supported a Conservative amendment to the bill which would remove the charitable status for private schools, and the amendment would sort of remove that provision, which is essentially the entire point of the bill. Anyway, this shows the Lord's power to scrutinise legislation. It does, because they've struck down or delayed the passing of a bill. But they can only do this for a year, and so the government can force it through if they want to. Ultimately, it shows the bill is far from through the legislative and that we will definitely hear more about it. In other news on education, The Independent reported the Education Secretary is set to review guidance on the banning of mobile phones in schools. Bridget Phillipson is looking at whether the guidance on current bans is working and whether it is effective. Since the government do not support social media bans for under 16s and they have voted against the Tory amendment to ban phones in schools, they are coming under increasing pressure over online safety for children. This is despite Phillipson offering support to the Association of the School and College Leaders over the removal of phones in schools. Her review will specifically look at monitoring the use of phones in schools better. The Guardian noted Reeves is set to reveal the biggest UK spending cuts since austerity in her spring budget. So next week, or this week coming, Reeves will deliver a big spending cut, and The Guardian, as well as other papers, are speculating that the Chancellor will announce spending cuts of up to billions of pounds greater than expected. This would cost as much as 7% of some department budgets over the next 4 years. The IFS said the Chancellor will be hoping that cash injections over the summer, combined with greater efficiency, will mean services aren't hit as hard as they might have otherwise. In more positive news, it is unlikely Reeves will tax working people, despite speculation she is planning to introduce a stealth tax by freezing income tax thresholds. In other political news, the Times reported Nicola Sturgeon's police inquiry has been dropped as her estranged husband appeared in court. While the inquiry into her accusations related to the embezzlement of SNP funds has been dropped, the former minister said there was not a scrap of evidence against her and that she was completely in the clear. She said this outside her home in Glasgow, and she was offered support by her sister and the current First Minister, who says the SNP were definitely a victim of embezzlement. Her husband remains under inquiry. The Guardian covered warnings from social care providers and said the sector faces collapse due to NIC contributions and the living wage increases. The National Care Association has warned that the sector faces collapse due to the likelihood of service closures. The group represents more than 1,000 small to medium care providers. One such provider, which cares for between 450 and 500 households, said it may have to fold and leave the area it's in Lancaster. They said this was due directly to the national insurance contribution rises. The Lib Dem leader, Ed Davey, called for the Lib Dems for Labour to cancel the damaging tax hike, amid other providers like Transport for Riders also struggling. In news on foreign policy, The Independent noted Starmer has spoken to Zelensky following Trump's talks with Putin. Starmer and Zelensky spoke about Trump's progression on a ceasefire with Russia. This progression relates to the potential of a partial ceasefire over attacks to Ukraine's power grid. There are hopes that the ceasefire of this kind would then progress to a maritime ceasefire given time. In the talks, Zelensky shared updates on the situation in Ukraine. Starmer reiterated the UK's support behind Ukraine, and both are in support of America's progress on the issue. Starmer, though, did say that peace should be long and stable for Ukraine, and the Ukrainian leader said that he wanted to understand the details of what the USA and Russia talked about. The Telegraph reported Ed Miliband is planning on discussing a coal phase-out with China in what seems to be a U-turn for his department. Miliband, the energy secretary, is in China this week, or was in China last week, discussing net zero, and a press release said he will share expertise with China on phasing out coal usage as Britain did last year. This is despite him previously planning not to address the issue directly. Miliband is the third minister to visit Beijing since the election, and this has called Labour's relationship with the state into question amid the human rights abuses and environmental record. The Guardian reported Number 10 has said the UK is set to increase its military planning in support of Ukraine. Keir Starmer's spokesperson said the UK is set to increase the scale of the military planning in support of Ukraine, as thousands of troops would be needed to support Ukraine if the ceasefire was to be made. This would mean the UK withdraws its presence in other areas to fill the gap for Ukraine. These would then be filled in elsewhere by other countries as part of a coalition of the willing being the many countries lining up to support Ukraine. The PM also said that there would be severe consequences for Putin if he breached any potential peace deal. The Independent detailed the Treasury has said £25 billion of Russian assets have been frozen since the start of the Ukraine. 2001 individuals have been sanctioned, which has raised £25 billion of Russian assets. A Treasury minister has said that that they had deprived the Russian economy of over $400 billion, equivalent to 4 years of their military spending. Some say this needs to go further and that these funds should be used to support Ukraine directly, namely the Lib Dems and the Conservatives. In global news, The Independent noted the USA has deleted evidence of Russia's kidnapping of thousands of Ukrainian children. Right, so just so you don't get confused by the headline, let me explain. Yale University's research lab has been leading an international effort to trace and recover tens of thousands of kids from Russia and help them back to Ukraine. It would also help prosecute those involved in delivering the kids across the border. Well, this effort has been hampered by the Trump administration, who cut funding while it was compiling a database of Russian war crimes that includes these kidnappings. They were monitoring 116 Russian sites and trying to find the around 35,000 children who had been kidnapped. The US State Department apparently deleted the evidence, which would not have only helped in prosecuting Putin, but could have helped get the children home. This could make the Trump administration liable for prosecution. The team have also had to stop sharing intelligence with the EU and Europol over the issues. The Independent also detailed Trump has signed an order to shut down the US Federal Education Department. He is doing this on the grounds that the department is excessively bureaucratic and it is having a negative impact on children's performance. However, Trump can't really do this without the congressional approval because it was Congress who set up the department. So they would have to approve its dismantling. Reuters noted that Russia and Ukraine have both accused each other of blowing up a Russian gas station. A blaze was captured at an oil facility in Saduza, which is located hundreds of meters from the Ukrainian border. The town nearby was captured by Ukraine, but heavy fighting from Russia has seen it been taken back. The Russians alleged the Ukrainian soldiers blew the facility up during their retreat, while Ukrainian forces have accused Russia of doing the shelling as a provocation for them. The details surrounding the attack aren't clear. The Telegraph reported Macron is exploring the UN alternative to Starmer's Ukrainian plan. Macron is exploring an alternative to putting European boots on the ground in Ukraine. One of these is the possibility of a UN-led solution. This is different to the coalition of the willing being spearheaded by Starmer and Macron, as it is going after a peace deal. However, any peace deal with a peacekeeping force would need to go through the UN Security Council, of which the USA and Russia are members and have vetoes, so it's unlikely there will be any movement on that front. BBC News noted Israel has ordered its army to seize additional territory in Gaza. The defence minister has instructed forces to seize territory which is threatened to occupy permanently if Hamas doesn't give up the remaining hostages. It is thought that there are 59 hostages still in Gaza, 24 of whom are believed to be alive. The defence minister has said it will continue to expand operations until said hostages are freed, living and dead. Hamas has said it remains involved in negotiations over a stop to the fighting and securing a prisoner exchange. The Israeli defence minister then talked up the possibility of Trump's plan for Gaza being actioned, while Hamas said it would be in breach of international laws over ethnic cleansing. The Independent also detailed Israeli strikes on Gaza have hit houses and killed dozens. Israeli strikes on Wednesday night killed dozens across the Gaza Strip, and according to medics in the territory, the strikes hit houses as well. Israel blamed the heavy strikes on Gaza, who didn't support an Israeli-backed proposal over the hostage releases, which seems to have infringed upon their ceasefire deal. Now let's look at some stats and trends. The Times covered alarm from scientists as Antarctica has hit its sea ice low for the fourth year in a row. Between 1978 and 2015, the sea ice extent, which was growing. That is basically the percentage of ice which has a coverage of more than 15% on the surface. The World Meteorological Agency, the WMO, has said this trend seems to be reversing. This means that the west of the continent is more vulnerable, and this is the area where the Thwaites Glacier, nicknamed the Doomsday Glacier for its size, is. In numbers, the previous minimum was 200 million square meters, and that has been pulled down in the last 4 years to 1.98 million. The Telegraph reported Britain is no longer a rich country after living standards have plunged. Now, Max Mosley of the Institute for Economic and Social Research actually responded, saying that the answer was less straightforward than it might have been 100 years ago. He did not say Britain was a poor country. However, Research by the Institute found that some in the UK, specifically those in the poorest of those in the northeast of England and Birmingham, are worse off than some of the poorest people in parts of Slovenia or Lithuania. With economic growth and productivity falling behind other nations after the financial crash and then it failing to recover through subsequent governments and COVID, the UK's position as a place for high living standards is being threatened. The Institute has called on the government to increase the personal income tax threshold and remove the two-child benefit in order to see living standards improve. However, these measures together would cost around £12 billion. The Independent also covered the two-child benefit cap, noting that it could lift 600,000 children out of poverty. In 5 years, scrapping the two-child benefit cap would be the single most effective policy option the government could implement to tackle child poverty. It would lift 600,000 of children out of poverty by 2030, compared to the 150,000 children that could be lifted by other means. To do this, the government would have to spend £3.9 billion per year. This comes as Labour is drawing up its child benefit strategy, which would deliver an enduring reduction to child poverty within this Parliament. This work is going to be led by Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, and Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary. The spokesperson noted the government said those measures will be taken alongside others like the initiative on benefit reform and on the living wage. BBC News reported more than a fifth of UK adults are not looking for work. Official figures show the economic inactivity rate was at 21.5% in the 3-month period before January, this dropped from the year before and the immediate quarter before as well. It's also relatively low compared to figures in 2009 and trends since then. But this comes as Labour want to tackle the welfare system and are looking at bringing up employment rates to 80%. They currently sit at around 75%. The Independent detailed a poll has showed half of Reform voters do not believe in the COVID vaccine. A poll by YouGov has found the party's voters generally tend to hold strong views on COVID. The poll was compared to other parties where between 14 and 18% of voters distrusted the jabs. In general terms, 71% of people said that they trusted the jab a fair or a great deal, while only 24% of voters said they don't trust it at all. In non-political news then, Sky News noted Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore splashed down on Earth. The two astronauts who were stuck in space for 9 months only intended to be there for 9 days. Issues delayed their return and there were talks at several points after going up and getting them, but that never transpired and they splashed down safely this week. BBC News detailed a pedestrian died and others were hurt in a crash in central London. A woman died after a van crashed into pedestrians, 3 were injured and 1 faced life-threatening injuries. 2 of the 3 injured were taken to hospital and treated there. A man was arrested on the scene, suspected of causing the death by dangerous and drug-induced driving. It was not treated as a terror attack. The Independent covered the fire at Heathrow Airport, where 200,000 passengers were affected by the closure of Europe's busiest airport. Blaze broke out at a nearby substation, causing the airport to lose power. Houses and families in the surrounding area were also affected. The airport closed, it had no power, and the spokesperson noted that Europe's busiest airline used the same electricity as a small city, and so that it would take a while to restore said power. The National Grid were then able to get it partially back on in the afternoon, which meant some flights could continue, and since then, more and more are going ahead. Counter-terrorism officers responded and led the investigation into the fire's cause. They said there was no indication of foul play, but they were retained an open mind to the prospect. Sky News noted US heavyweight boxing legend George Foreman has died aged 76. A statement on his Instagram account said he died peacefully, surrounded by loved ones after an extraordinary life. The tributes came in from around the boxing world, which of course Foreman was a legend in, and after coming back from losing to Muhammad Ali and besting Michael Moorer to become the oldest world champion at 46. Boxing isn't my thing, I sort of had to read off the script there. In between his time then, out of boxing, he became a church minister and then went on to sell a range of grills. BBC News covered strikes in Birmingham, which have caused a bin Mageddon and giant rats and a stench. More than 1 million people have been affected by the issues, which have resulted in 6-foot bin bags stacks in the area and giant rats roaming around the place. This situation has been going on for weeks, with bin workers from the Unite Union striking on and off since the start of the year. They've been striking over plans from local government to downgrade staff and reduce hours, reduce pay as a result of the local authorities' financial issues. Tensions on the picket line seem fairly fraught, with police being called recently after striking workers blocked lorries from leaving the site. They say they did this due to safety issues. Then, several days after, there was an accusation of bin workers being hit by objects and being struck by objects. But being struck by objects. The local council then condemned violence on the picket lines before the Unite Union clamped back and accused the government of smearing its workers. There is yet to be an agreement on the end to the strikes, and so it seems like they will continue for some time. Anyway, that's the news I got this week. Thank you for sticking with me last week, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. I also hope you found this useful. If there's anything you'd like me to do for next week specifically, or if you had any issues with any of the news this week, let me know and I'll address it in the comments. Bye, have a good week.